Hey everyone, it's your girl Maddie here, aka Beavermosh, and today I am joined by Joe and Philly of Gama, who are set to release their latest record, Bats, on Prosthetic Records. Joe, Philly, how are you doing tonight? Thank you for joining me.
We're good. I'm good. Joe, I can't answer the
Yeah,
phone.
I'm great, and it's great to be talking to somebody from Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, this is going to be studio album number 8 for your band, and which means you've been active as a metal band for over 20 years now, which is something that not every band gets to. How do you think you've managed to stay so consistent putting out music for this span of time?
I think it kind of snuck up on us, to be honest. Um, it's kind of hard to explain really. We didn't do any of this expecting to be doing it in 20 years. As we always said when we started the band, we had a list of goals, but the goals were all quite modest. Like
Hmm.
gig outside your hometown, get a t-shirt, get a patch, get a badge,
Yeah.
play in Dublin. And I suppose that list just kept getting longer, really, where it was like, okay, we've made a record now, we want to get signed, and then you get signed, and you're like, I want to make another, I want to go to America, I want to go to Japan. So the list kind of just keeps going. I don't know. I think in terms of continuing as a band, it's probably because we're actually also friends, Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably the reason why we're still here and we've been doing it for so long is we get on well and we're kind of very respectful or try to be of each other's lives. So if
Hmm.
somebody has a kid or is getting married or whatever, we'll just down tools for 6 months and all celebrate that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to try and have realistic expectations on your bandmates as well. Instead of saying, okay, we're going to go and climb Mount Everest, we can be like, let's just go for a beer and talk about Star Wars. That sounds nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of those, not to talk trash about people, but I think a lot of our contemporaries, and I've said this before, I think a lot of them didn't last as long as we did because they maybe had unrealistic expectations, or they had been fed unrealistic expectations. Whereas from very early on, I think we identified what the upside of this was for us, and it was not millions of dollars. So we've always kind of maintained lives outside of the band.
Hmm.
So, and then in terms of uh, you know, releasing music and stuff, some bands, and like I think as young fellas, we were definitely in bands that didn't really have much output. Like it was almost as if rehearsing and playing was the thing, and recording was like a difficult big hill to climb. But we all kind of came of age together making records, and increasingly as we've kept going, we're able to make more and more of them ourselves.
Hmm.
We just produce, mix, and master this one ourselves. So like it's kind of like it's not a stranger to us to make stuff. It's kind of the other main mode of being in the band is writing and recording and messing around and making music. So we don't view it as we don't view it as secondary to playing live. It's pretty much on exactly the same page as playing live for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you started this project, this band, you said you were in other projects before that, but did you go into it? Did everybody go into saying we are going to play thrash metal, or did that just kind of develop?
Well,
No,
Joe, you were there first. You tell me.
that was definitely the MO from the very start. I
Hmm.
guess following on to what Philly was saying about a lot of the music we kind of bonded over when we were 20 and stuff. Was kind of underground thrash stuff like Exodus and
Hmm.
things like that. And in 2002, that kind of music was a lot more underground than it is now. So like we kind of were very aware from being very young that the idea of the band was that there was a specific kind of not set of rules, although we did have rules, but we knew exactly what to do and what not to do. And I guess part of that Philly will tell you is we had seen all of our favorite thrash bands kind of where they went wrong and these misstep albums, so we kind of had a bit of a map as well.
Although I think we've probably made some missteps ourselves.
Hmm.
um, yeah, well, the lads, it was interesting. It was one of those things that can only happen when you're like 16-year-old geeks. But Joe and I had been friends since we're like 11.
Hmm.
Uh, but suddenly, when we were about 16, there was like some new people, as there often is. And one of them was Luke. And Luke was already like quite a serious looking heavy metal kid. He had a patch jacket and he wore a biker jacket and he had long hair and stuff. He was much more sort of put together than we were on that
Hmm.
front, or I perceived him as that anyway. And Luke had all these tapes, and he gave Joe the tapes, and that was Nuclear Assault, Dayside,
Yeah.
Anthrax. Joe was already listening. We were already listening to Megadeth and Metallica, and it was kind of like suddenly there was just this big shot in the arm. So in a weird way, there was if they, which they did, they started a covers band, which I wasn't in, and had this other guy singing for them, and it was like it was all we were doing at that time was drinking and smoking and listening to thrash metal.
Hmm.
So it was kind of obvious to me that they were going to do that, and then they did. So yeah, like it was very much the stated mission from the start that would be the thing. And then obviously when that guy kind of left and I came in to do this covers thing, we were immediately starting to write our own stuff, and of course that was going to come out in the same vein as well. Not that we were capable of playing it very well,
Yeah.
but yeah. So like from the off, it was kind of the thing. And it's weird in a way because we've been doing it for so long now. You kind of almost forget that you're in a genre band. You know,
Yeah.
you kind of just you're so busy making stuff, and to us because we're so inured to this music and to this style, it seems wildly varied from each other. Each piece of music seems like it's wildly different. Like you're
Hmm.
doing something hugely distinctive and creative, with each thing, and then people listen back to it and they're just like, "Yep, more of the same." So yeah, like we're a thrash band and always have been, but it doesn't always feel like that.
Yeah. Well, I listened. I've heard that. I listened to the record. I see the cover, and looks like it sounds like it's coming straight out of, say, an old Hitchcock horror film. The music seems a bit more animated, theatrical than maybe some of your past works. Is that kind of what you're going for here?
Yeah, I mean the cover, much like Lebowski's Rug, it really brought the room together.
Mm.
I think the music is definitely very energetic. It's a very upbeat album. It's very raucous kind of record. Joe, talk to us about the cover.
Yeah, well, like I think Maddie, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. That was the idea. It was supposed to be like a 1960s kind of style of sort of horror movie, and a
Mm.
lot of the time in the past, what we'll do is we'll try and come up with a cover and like a song or two to wrap, kind of the theme of the album around. And this time it was just to try and make something that looked and felt kind of like a 1960s horror movie. And like we didn't set out to write a bunch of songs in that vein. It's always like, okay, let's write one or two songs like that, and then we'll just start writing about whatever other
Hmm.
nonsense we usually write about,
Yeah, and yeah, that's it. Like we always try to have a visual theme, you know, um, even if it's just for the booklet of the record. And our last album was 19th century. It was like Victorian theatrical, playbills and stuff,
Hmm.
which is a little bit Beatlesy, I suppose. And off the back of that, we were like, what do we do? And then initially, I was like pushing for a 1920s thing. But then, yeah, like just once we saw Graham's art, it was like, okay, 60s. So, the inlay of the album, which is by our art director and Joe's big brother, Rory McGuigan, who's excellent. It has this 60s movie promo materials vibe off it, like lobby cards, exhibitors booklets, that kind of thing, which we would be nerdly collectors and fans of anyway. So yeah, I think we've in our own small way, we've always kind of done things like that which aren't really done in heavy metal. And I think having an album which is kind of 60s like that is just not a done thing.
I mean,
I
metal wasn't around in the 60s.
Well, yeah, I suppose arguably it was 1968 Black Sabbath, but
Yeah.
it wasn't. It certainly wasn't self-referential and eating its own arse like it is now. I'm very impressed with. Have you seen Green Lung's new album cover? Have you seen how cool that is?
Yes, the fantastic record.
Yeah, like it's amazing
Yeah.
looking. The way they've designed it around one of those like 1960s penguin
Yeah.
like covers, like that blows me away. And I've got to be honest, I think they're the only other metal band I've seen who have put that level of effort into something in years.
Hmm.
So that's very cool. But yeah, we're always trying to squish more ideas into these little spaces.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a big difference between Bat and your previous output is you self-produced this one. And tell me, what advantages does did you find that awarded you, or what makes this process different for you?
The process this time was probably different for a number of reasons. Again, what I mentioned earlier about trying to give people room to breathe in their lives and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Domo had a daughter, and Philly bought a house and was renovating the house. So we actually, I think we recorded the bass and the drums. Maybe it was about maybe a year before we finished the whole entire record. So the best thing about it really was being able to do it at our own pace.
Mm-hmm.
With the previous album, we did it in the lockdown and we did a lot of it ourselves, but there was still very much a kind of, right, we're going to send this to somebody and get them to mix it and et cetera, et cetera. Whereas we kind of, we've been doing this so long now that whoever we would get to do it would probably have less experience than we do in terms of producing and, doing thrash records. We've been doing it for 20 years. So I think a lot of the time spent, in England and stuff like that, making records for 10 years, we're actually learning an awful lot. So we're able to do it ourselves and not be worried if it was going to sound like, one of those horrible misstep records,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the flexibility, as Joe said, was a huge thing. Being able to literally like pop in for 90 minutes to record something, just to get something down, to solve a problem, to advance something on. And other times able to spend a whole night, a whole afternoon recording. So like recording at home. Also the familiarity is there, working with Domo. I honestly, like, it's probably not a good thing. I sometimes at the minute think I probably couldn't get as good vocals with somebody else now, because I've worked with Domo so extensively, and he sort of gets me so well, and we've gotten such good stuff out of it, and the rapport is there, and he knows, he kind of knows all the psychology, which is bizarrely a part of recording vocals anyway. There's a psychology aspect to it. You kind of have
Mm-hmm.
to, it's a cross between being an engineer and a director of a movie or something. There's kind of an acting aspect, a psychological aspect to it, and Domo is so good at that. His bedside manner, you know, is so good. So, like, that's the advantage. I suppose the downside is, if there is one, obviously it does put expectation on a member of the group. Like, it's very like, Domo, you're producing this, so
Sure.
obviously he's excellent at it, but I guess it means it's somebody's fault if it's not good, etc. But he doesn't make bad records. He's very meticulous. Like the song "Rusted Gold," I recorded 300 takes of vocals to get that song
Yeah. Now you keep referring to these misstep thrash records, and we don't have to name names. I think I know which ones you're referring to, but I'm wondering, like, what precautions, or what did you do to make sure that it didn't, what was wrong with those records that you avoided when making your music?
Well, I think Joe could probably speak better to this than I can, but the fact is, and most of these bands would admit it, it was cynicism that made those mistakes happen in the 80s and 90s. Metallica made a gamble with the Black Album, and they won, and everyone else universally followed them, either because of record company pressure, or because I guess some of them genuinely have been doing the same thing for maybe 4 albums now and were kind of sick of it. Maybe they were getting on in age, getting into their late 20s, early 30s, and decided they were going to gamble. Others, it was pressure from record labels, A&R people, marketing departments, or it was just pure cynicism. They thought they could also become big, and that this shift was happening. But like all those albums, Quattro, Sound of White Noise, all those records just kind of went off a cliff. What's your take on it?
Yeah, like again, that was probably that. It was good kind of knowing that, like, as being fans of the genre and having listened to all these bands' discographies, you could kind of see where commercial stuff worked and didn't work. Now, I guess it's kind of a bit of a weird one for us, because this record probably has some of our most commercial kind of music on it. But I think also, if you've made 7 albums of blistering speed metal, kind of, you're allowed a little bit more leeway to kind of do that. Yeah, no, we definitely have allowed ourselves a little more room to do that. So yeah, I think also, like, taste has a big part of it. There's some bands out there where you can kind of tell they're probably just not really, I don't know, they're inspired by kind of a lot of different kind of music, and that comes across in their music. So it doesn't sound like they're just sitting around listening to Dio and, Iron Maiden, which unfortunately we kind of are, really,
Yeah, and then in terms of like, what do you do to try to limit that? I suppose, in the past, our thing has always been, we police each other's creative decisions or
Mhm.
songwriting. And Paul, our drummer, who was in the band for a very long time, was a big part of that. He was, he would actively kind of police that and was a real true believer and would kind of keep us on the straight and narrow as a kind of thrash. And Paul left the band before the previous album. And I think that has been a factor in the music becoming more broad, because he's not policing it, you know. Um, it's not as if having that model to follow, and I think it's something we've talked about a lot in our career, and I think people now bring it up when they talk to us and go, oh, you guys have rules and stuff. It's like, it doesn't mean you still don't make mistakes.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you still don't write stuff that people might not like. But increasingly, as we get on, I think we're doing it more and more for ourselves anyway, in terms of making stuff. And I find, or we seem to have found so far, that the more we're doing it for ourselves and pleasing ourselves, the more people who get the band will like it anyway,
Well, I think that's the thing, right? Like, a lot of people will say this band. I think an example of that is maybe like Cannibal Corpse. So they say, well, they keep putting out the same record. And on the other hand, there's bands that say, oh, they took a radical change and they quote unquote sold out. But I as a listener can tell if a band is making a decision to either stay the same or change radically based on a like calculated like focus group decision, or if it was like genuine. This is the music that they felt like they wanted to make. And I think that's the difference between like a good record and a bad record, when there is either we're putting out the same thing, or we are changing and we are maybe not doing what our fans expected.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me ask you a question, Maddie. You've listened to the record. Have you heard any of our previous records?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes.
And what's your perception? Do you think it is? Do you think it is identifiably different, or how did it strike you?
Yeah. So that's interesting, because I was actually going to ask you, because you have your band has gone on admission saying this is your weirdest album yet, and I liked that because it felt like there were some left turns. It was it was quote unquote strange by your own admission, but in a way that like felt fun, like you were like being playful, and I appreciated that, and I hope, and is that kind of what you were trying to do with the record?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, kind of happened by accident, didn't it?
Yeah, we've never. I think maybe we've had one guest backing vocalist, one of our friends, on one record, really, but
Yeah.
never had any guest musicians on any of our records or done anything like that. And it was kind of like, I don't know, this album, it just kind of felt like it needed some things like that in it. We were very aware as well that like for everything that sounded kind of slightly different or more kind of like a Dio song or a Saxon song maybe, we wanted to make sure that there was something that sounded very like us. So Philly will probably tell you better about this, but we spent a lot of time thinking about the track listing for the album, how to get something we thought was kind of slightly risque and put it beside something that felt like it was more like what people would expect from us. But again, it's so strange. Whenever you're inside, everything looks different. Whereas like it's like whenever you're going looking at paint and there's 30 shades of the same color and you're like, I need to go and get my eyes tested because these all look the same,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the way the songs for the record were chosen, I'm actually really proud of that. I think that's one of the most interesting, or definitely one of the most creatively interesting things about the record. We wrote so much music for the album. We wrote roughly 30 pieces of music.
Damn.
And then we recorded loads of stuff. And then we had our pick for the record. And it was incredibly like ego free, is the way I've been describing it. Every other time you go to make a record, historically, us and every other band, people will have their favorites. They'll have ones that they have a problem with. They think this one wasn't as good as it was in the demo, or they maybe even sometimes a political beef. Oh, you told me you didn't like mine, so I don't like yours. That can happen a lot, and I think that's actually one of those natural things in the world. But on this one, we actively made the decision, sort of led by Damo. He was like, "Let's just pick a track listing that works musically. Let's just think what song works into the next one, what the best decision would be for the flow of the music." And, we kept having to sort of pull each other up on that, because every so often someone would go, oh, well, what about that? And at one point I said to Damo, on the chat. I was like, "Oh, I hate that song," and he went, "Yeah, but I hate that other one." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Maybe. But no, we don't
This
actually
is
hate
weird.
it.
Like, part of the thing with it was that there originally were two songs that had Necro in the title, and we're like, don't worry about it because half of these songs are going to go on this album and half of them will go on the next album. So we're not going to end up with two songs called Necro on the same album, and the two songs with Necro on the were both left off this album, and they're both going to be in the next album. So,
That's
Love
right.
that.
But we did end up with two songs with hair. There's two songs with hair in the title on this album, though. So it's yeah. So yeah, it was done in a very interesting way.
Sounds like it's very democratic almost.
Oh, totally, totally. Like,
Yeah.
and actually, not even really democratic. Damo kind of did a bit of a look. Here's what I think works musically, and we talked about that, and I think it changed very little. It changed a bit, but that was it, really. And he really knows his stuff about music, and we were all like, "Yeah, that actually does work." So
it was definitely a really positive thing for the band because it's the sort of thing, to be honest, about 3 or 5 or 7 years ago when we'd be making a record that there would be arguments. I would be like, I'm leaving the band chat for a month because I'm so annoyed with everybody. So I think it is a good sign that everybody is not only way more involved in the songwriting, like everything is very collaborative now. We all watched that Beatles documentary and we're like, okay, let's be like this, but not be like this.
Yeah, I've got to be honest. The Beatles documentary actually kind of did make me feel differently about making records. I was like, I recognized certain things about being in a band in it, and then other stuff I was like, oh man, look how they do it. Like they were so like fearless with ideas and stuff. They're constantly turning around each other and going, I have this thing, and then just start playing, and they don't care if it's not finished. They don't care if it's no good. They just start doing it, and everybody else nods. And you're like, fuck. Be that fearless about the ideas you bring to the table. But yeah, no, I'm really pleased with. I'm very pleased with how we did it. We were extremely well behaved in how we did it. I suppose, as Joe said earlier, we took a long time to make the record. If I could go back, I'd probably fix that. But everything else about it was really positive. We were all super chilled about it. Everybody plugged in really hard. We've all been really involved in the music videos. In the sort of the design and the merch, and it's great. It's a great moment for the band. Like to be 8 albums in and doing something that you feel you can, you can stand it up and go like, I'm actually really proud of that. I don't feel like this is churn. I feel like it's good.
Well, you brought up music videos, and that's great because I wanted to talk about the humor aspect of your music because I watched the video for Speed Funeral, and it's so hysterical. I laughed like literally, and I want to know is how do you tap into that comedic aspect? Is it just a collective thing that the band has going for them?
That's a good question. Music video. Philly has been for the last good few years very, very involved in directing and writing synopsises for them and stuff.
Yeah.
It tends to be stuff that we're all kind of on board with. I think we did one video actually in about 2015 or 17 where our old drummer Paul didn't like the idea, so he's like, I'm just not going to be in this video. I'll sort of in the corner. But yeah, no, I think it's the same as songwriting or anything. If you can get everybody on board with the idea, it'll be better. Whereas if you're trying to fight your way through everyone else's opinions, it's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, and the humor thing. I don't know, Maddie, whether you were talking just about the humor in terms of videos or in terms of the whole band in general.
I think both.
Yeah, well, I think, and I've sort of, I feel like I've talked about this a lot, so I don't want to repeat myself. But back when the band started, we were starting it as a group of friends. Obviously, when you're with your friends, you're always joking and laughing, especially when you're young. I was so embarrassed and nervous to be doing it, to be singing and to be there. You wouldn't think it's a look now, but I was so nervous about doing it that the only way I could feel comfortable or armored was for it to be a continuation of what you would call the crack, the conversations we were having anyway. So it would have to be funny. It would have to be entertaining for the lads. You couldn't show up for a rehearsal in Joe's garage, 19 years old, shaking like a leaf, and then turn around and go, I'm going to read out these lyrics about, my traumatic past. It's not it's not where we were, and it's not who we were. So that's kind of just always been there. And then obviously, well, perhaps not obviously, as we kind of got on through being in the band, and you start to find other ways, like other ways of expressing things, like music videos, which we didn't make a music video for a long time after we started the band, in 10 years or more, and at that point, it's kind of the language you're already speaking to each other. So of course you want the video to be like that too. And obviously, if the song has humorous content in it, which nearly all of them do,
Mm-hmm.
you want in there to do that. And also the videos, like all the videos I love the most, have like humor in them of one kind or another. Queen videos are always funny. Soundgarden had funny videos, and
Mm-hmm.
all those other big bands who do great jobs of it, like Foo Fighters and shit like that. Like it's always kind of funny stuff. So it works. It works really well for videos. Um, and as Joe was saying, over the last 10 years, we've become more and more involved in that. So we're now at the point where we like produce them, direct them, write the synopsis for them, and that's great because it saves money and it gives you more control.
Yeah.
We have like people around us, like Kieran Acharya, who's very, very talented editor, director, camera op, DP, you name it. And we'll have the likes of him, and we'll work with Kieran and a few other people to make videos. I really enjoy doing it. I wish we had more. I wish we had more time and more budget to make more of them. But you kind of get one big in person video per album. That's kind of the way it goes,
Well, if you don't mind, I would like to go back a bit in time, and talk about your track Mussolini Moss, because it probably still is your most popular tune if you look at like streaming numbers and all that. And obviously there is this evergreen aspect of it kind of being like a fuck Nazis kind of track. But why do you think this song has been connecting for fans old and new for this long?
I suspect on some level, and as Kanye West said, Joe, I'm gonna let you finish, like you said next, but like I think the reason that it has killed it on Spotify is because a computer has recognized that it's a short song.
Hmm.
I think some weird algorithm thing. It's got fucking loads. It's like 2.5 million streams or something. I think the fact it's like 98 seconds or something like that means something to that computer, and it has
Sure.
spat it out. And I'm very grateful for that. It was not ever intended to be a single or anything like that. It's an album track off our third album.
Hmm.
I don't know. So what's your take on it?
I think it's strange because we have a song from Speed Between the Lines called Alt Reich, and it has pretty much exactly the same message as Mussolini Mosh, and it's a lot
Hmm.
more kind of like punky and crossovery, and like I would have thought a song like that would have connected with people a lot more. But I don't know. I guess like part of it is also the title, I think,
Yeah.
because I think knowing that we're not like a Nazi band, if you hear a song called Mussolini Mosh, you might want to hear the lyrics. It's kind of same as Metal Idiot or something like that. Sometimes like the song title is enough to make people interested. Look,
It can be
Sure.
provocative like that. So yeah, like it's a great song. We still play it live. Um, and it was done at a time when we were very like flexing our muscles. Like Paul's drumming on it is amazing, and it has this cool moshy riff, and you can use it as a song live to do like Walls of Death and stuff. It's kind of our most Wall of Deathy song, so I suppose it sticks out in people's memory too. Yeah, and it's crazy. Like last, 2 weeks ago, we're on tour in the UK, and I'm singing it, and you can hear that the lyrics were written during local council and European elections in 2008, because it's like the BNP. The BNP got seats in the European Parliament, I think, at that time, and that's in the lyrics, and it's like the BNP are no longer a political force of any description, mainly because their message has now been absorbed by mainstream parties like the Tories and the Republicans and stuff. So it's really weird. It already has it's like fuck the British Union of fascists. It's like totally antiquated political terminology in it. But the message is still fresh.
So I
Oh, sorry, just spilled my beer. Spilled my
no
beer
worries.
into a lamp. Into a lamp.
Oh
Mm.
fuck.
We're all right. We're all right. We're all right.
Cool. I want to ask your take on something because I've heard this opinion before watching various metal talk shows, and even read a history of metal book recently that made this argument that basically the idea that like thrash in the modern era is dead. It had its point of popularity and it kind of went out of fashion. It was kind of just a stepping stone for us to get to like the new wave of British heavy metal to death metal, and that it's like kind of there's some novelty acts now, but thrash really isn't like a factor anymore. What do you say to that?
Well, for me, it's kind of, whenever I hear people saying that, they usually are saying that from the point of view saying that, oh, death metal or black metal is still this genre that's evolving and doing something kind of different,
Mm.
And I suppose in some ways that's kind of true. Like, same as kind of like AC/DC style classic rock. Thrash is one of those genres that there's a kind of preferred sound for it. People kind of prefer to hear the 80s version instead of the funkified version or whatever, that came in the mid 90s. So yeah, like I guess there is some truth that the genre is never going to have a band as big as Metallica again. But what I would also say is that most of the bands who are out there, like Testament and Exodus and Creator and stuff like that, are playing to much bigger audiences than any power metal or death metal bands. So thrash metal music is still extremely popular, and there's still a lot of people who like new thrash bands, but I think people who don't like new thrash bands are so enamored with the 80s stuff that I don't know. I would assume that they have the same opinions about death metal. They only want to listen to Florida death metal, not new bands or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, I think I have a sort of instinctual and probably quite healthy cynicism and contempt for people spouting like theories like this. I tell you, that doesn't exist. It's like, man, you can go to a festival, a ragtime festival, and you can sit around with thousands of people listening to ragtime music. That exists. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That is a thing from a time and a place. So things are both true and untrue. It's totally true that thrash metal was a thing, much like, say, disco or ragtime music or whatever, that existed in a time and actually quite largely in a place in about two locations, really. And there was a decade for that, and that time did pass, and those things did move on. But it's not a dead genre. Like, us and lots of other bands are proof of that. When we started the band, it didn't exist as a genre, effectively. There were a couple of bands still trolling on. Gary Holt was still going with Exodus, and that was kind of it. And now look at it. Like, Metallica are playing thrash metal. They're writing thrash metal. And they're the biggest band in the world. And loads of bands like ours are hovering around in the middle depths of the pond, and then like the larger bands from back in the 80s are killing it and playing big tours over the world. All those second tier thrash bands are doing really, really well. So like, the genre still exists. It had its time and its place when it was probably a dominant force, when it was probably something that slipped into the mainstream, but it definitely doesn't require that to continue to exist. And weirdly now, I'm seeing more bands get heat behind them than maybe ever, like younger thrash bands and stuff. Like, say, Code Orange were kind of playing thrash, Power Trip were playing thrash, Hell Ripper, I'm wearing this t-shirt now, they're like thrashy black metal and stuff. There's loads of bands coming up, and like High Command, or like that American band who seem to be doing really well as well. Like this, there's loads of it. Like there's loads of it around. So kind of like, opinions are like assholes, we're sticking our middle finger in yours.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you guys, there's Power Trip, Toxic Holocaust, Municipal Waste had their time. It's like, yes, it may not be this as popular before, but there's still clearly bands doing it and bands pushing it, and Hell Ripper, there's bands combining it with other sounds and making new things with at least thrash as a foundation. So I reject the idea that like thrash was a thing of the past.
Yeah, man, and like the free holidays me and Joe go on every year are proof that thrash is not dead. We go on free holidays about 5 times a year. We get to go and hang out with our friends, get paid to go and shout at people, and it's not dead. Can confirm I've spent 20 years having a great laugh with it.
Well, keeping on the topic of thrash, I would love to put you on the spot and ask you, for both of you, what are your top, say, 4 favorite thrash albums not made by the big 4?
Oh, Jesus.
I think we can probably do them collectively. So I'm going to say
Yeah.
this one collectively for me and Philly, Persecution Mania by Sodom.
Yeah,
For sure.
great one.
Yeah, I'd pick that even over Agent Orange. Yeah. Yeah, okay, go for that. I think for a lot of my life, I would have said, so I probably should give it an honorable mention, Unstoppable Force by Agent Steel. I think it had a huge formative impact. What nuclear assault are we going to pick there then, Joe? Because there's going to have to be something.
I think Survive by Nuclear Assault was a huge one, wasn't it?
Survive is very much.
I remember listening to it. Whenever me and Philly heard the tape for the first time, we were laughing. We were like, haha, like we thought that like the tape was playing too fast or something like that. And that was one of those things that definitely inspired us to be like, okay, our songs sound a little bit like Motorhead on the demos in the first album. And it's like, right, now we have to try and play
This.
really fast, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, so Survive. I think for me as well, like Game Over was massive, but I wouldn't put two Nuclear Assault in there. And then that's 3. What's a 4th one? Like pretty not trash.
Like, I do, you know, yeah, so we're not including anything from the big 4 or anything like that. So I don't know, like a Tankard maybe, you know, it was again something that was like really informative days, or even like a band like Raven. But yeah, maybe Tankard, Chemical Invasion or Morning After, they were both great.
Yeah, they were amazing. Do you know what else like that had a big impact? Which I don't know, thrash like, but like, Four of a Kind and Thrash Zone. You know, like DRI Records.
Oh yeah,
that's crossover. Like, so I suppose there's that, and Lights Camera Revolution.
That were in the same vein as Nuclear Assault. Like we were big fans of Ludacris and things like that as well. And they had exactly the same thing as Nuclear Assault, where the songs were super fast, and they had songs that were kind of funny, like that Green Eggs and Ham. But they also had songs like Fire at the Firehouse about racism and things like that. And but it was actually weird. One of the things that like we discovered is like everybody gets old. Nuclear Assault seemed so right on in the 80s when they were singing about equal rights, and then like on their last record there was like stuff about I don't know, just some like really right lyrics. And it just goes to show things change as people get older. Like Leonard Skinner had a song like 30th Saturday Night Special or whatever about handguns, and they were very anti-gun and stuff, but then they all got killed in a plane crash, and they brought out an album about 6 years ago called From My Cold Dead Hands. That's right. How great guns are. So you don't know what people will be saying around the coffin of Gama Bomb.
The large logo shaped coffin. Yeah, and Lights Camera Revolution was another one.
Yeah,
it was a great one as well. And listening to that and discovering the kind of funky punky stuff was really cool. It's a great genre. Like, if people out there haven't listened to it, I'd suggest get in and dive in. It's a great genre.
Yeah.
There's a lot of very samey music, and then some very exceptional variations within it. There was a lot of good stuff, and there was some. There were bands as well, like say Hellstar and stuff that we got into, or whether Joe definitely was kind of the leader on this stuff. But like, Joe would get crazy into it, and then he would bring it to me, and he'd listen to like Nosferatu and stuff like that. And there were some really, really cool songs on it. There were probably bands who ultimately didn't make a massive mark, but when you listen to it, you're like, wow, there's loads of merit in here. Like there's 3 or 4 tunes in here that are like really next level good.
That was definitely a thing where we had been listening to so much Bay Area and New York thrash music that like the vocals were really something where it was either shouty or fast, or there was a scream bit, and like as much as whenever we were 20 we probably wanted to have Iron Maiden style bits in the songs, we weren't able to do that. So like, right, let's look at bands like Flotsam and Jetsam or Hellstar who had those kind of qualities, and let's try and edge our way in kind of that way, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's really cool. If you love something enough, like the way we loved thrash, you can really make it your thing. You can really make your hobby your thing. And I've met Eric AK and had chats with him about his singing, and he sort of knew who I was. So it's nice. Like we did a lot of our homework, and we did it well, and it's kind of it's come back in quite a rewarding way for us. Like it's a fun.
I think again, though, that's probably why it was important. You know, again, back in the day, your heroes being bands like Raven and Flotsam and Jetsam, or Agency, Sodom, where you knew that the pinnacle of it was getting 400 people into a room. It wasn't, you know, playing Madison Square Garden. You know, so
yeah, that's it. Yeah, the expectations were pretty realistic.
Well, running out of time here, but I did want to ask you one thing. You just came off of a UK tour, and do you plan on extending that at all? Are you playing other parts of the world in support of this record, or other parts of, or are you playing more shows, I should say?
Yeah, no, of course. Like a large part of making a record is what shows you're going to play afterwards. So, we're playing Mexico City at Life After Death Horror Fest in December. Which is great. We haven't been in Mexico in over 10 years. We will be shortly announcing a short European tour for the spring. We're doing a tour of Ireland with Party Cannon, who are friends of ours, which is very nice. Because we sort of neglect Ireland a bit, considering it's our home country. It's a bit weird. So then, yeah, hopefully more summer festivals. There's discussion of going back to Japan. 2025, we want to come back to America. That needs a big run up. But yeah, like we're definitely going to spend a year or two now just kind of enjoying touring, trying to get back to some places where we haven't been in a long time. We're trying to get to new places. Like I think we're particularly excited about like Japan and America, I think anyway, and getting back to Europe, getting back into clubs in Europe, because just between one thing and another, as Joe said, real life gets in the way.
Yeah.
We haven't been out there doing those clubs in a long time. And once upon a time we had a very loyal following and people who we would see all the time at those shows. So it'll be interesting to go back and see who's there now.
Well, Billy, Joe, I want to, before I let you go, just give the floor completely to you for any last final thoughts, any burning ideas you want to share with my viewers, or just give your plugs.
So, what critical message would you like to deliver to the boys and girls?
The pandemic was a scam, folks.
The pandemic. Oh, you mean the pandemic?
The Marlboro Man. He's the only guy.
Yeah, you're right, man. I think it's mostly vote Trump and
Good luck. Buy a nuclear bomb shelter and get it installed in your back garden if you live in the Western world.
Yeah, it's a pretty doomy time. I don't know. I suppose most things that we have to say are probably included in that album, you know, and it's a fun album, and I hope people have fun when they listen to it, and I think that's the main job. You know, I met a few people on that UK tour who said that are like it was an excessively worthy and lofty thing to hear from people actually, but you know, they said, you know, that our music had helped them get through shit times. Usually university, people who are having a shit time at university tended to use our music to get through it, and that's very nice. And I hope at best that happens, and at least that you think it's funny and you enjoy the solos.
Well, Billy, Joe, it was my pleasure to talk with you. Bats is coming out November 10th, this Friday, off of Prosthetic Records. Go get it. Go listen to it. Be on the lookout for it. And hey, for everyone watching at home, my name is Maddie, aka Beavermosh, and I am signing off.